Philosophical thoughts on education.
Let us start this lesson with this activity. Direction. Read this conversation, then answer the question in the analysis space of this lesson.
Good morning, class. What is the function of the mouth?
To break the food into smaller pieces.
Very good. What about the stomach?
To digest the food.
Very good. Perfect. And what about the small intestines?
To absorb the food nutrients.
Do you think banking method is bad or good? What you just heard was an example of banking system of education or banking method. So, it is where teachers deposit facts on students' mind, so the tendency for the student is to only memorize the facts given by the teacher. Paulo Freire, from his book of Pedagogy of Oppression, disagrees with this system. He believes that factual lessons should be applied in a real-life situation too. Also, this method for him is a fundamentally narrative character, with the teacher as the subject and student as passive objects. The reason why Freire disagrees is that this method does not help students to reflect, connect, and apply what the teacher had taught in real life. There is nothing wrong with this method, but this is alarming that students using this method can also be considered as lacking of critical thinking. What do you think will happen if the food is not chewed in the mouth? What happens to the food in the stomach and to the stomach itself? What if the stomach fails to digest the food from the mouth? And what happens to the food in the small intestines? Will the small intestines be able to absorb the food? I am Marcos R. Buenaventura.
And I am Juhaira Guindo, your presenter for today.
John Locke. John Locke was an English philosopher and political theorist who was born in 1632 in Rington, Somerset, England, and died in 1704 in High Lever, Essex. He is recognized as the founder of British empiricism and the author of the first systematic exposition and defense of political liberalism. The empiricist educator. He acquired knowledge about the world through the senses, learning by doing and by interacting with the environment. Simple ideas become more complex through comparison, reflection, and generalization, or also known as the inductive method. He questioned the long traditional view that knowledge came exclusively from literary sources, particularly the Greek and the Latin classics. He opposed the divine right of kings theory, which led that the monarch had the right to be an unquestioned and absolute ruler over his subjects. Political order should be based upon a contact between the people and the government. Aristocrats are not destined by birth to be rulers. People were to establish their own government and select their own political leaders from among themselves. It also requires civic education. Lastly, people should be educated to govern themselves intelligently and responsibly, in accordance to Ornstein book by 1984. And for John Locke, education is not the acquisition of knowledge contained in great books. It is learners interacting with concrete experiences, comparing and reflecting on same concrete experiences. The learner is an active, not a passive agent of his or her own learning. From the social dimension, education is seeing citizens participate actively and intelligently in establishing their government and in choosing who will govern them from among themselves, because they are convinced that no one person is destined to be their ruler forever.
Herbert Spencer. Herbert Spencer was born in April 27, 1820 in Derbyshire, England, and died on December 8, 1903 in Brington, Sussex. He is an English sociologist and philosopher, an early advocate of the theory of evolution, who achieved an influential synthesis of knowledge, advocating the preeminence of the individual over society and of science over religion. Spencer's concept of survival of the fittest means that human development had gone through an evolutionary series of stages, from the simple to the complex, and from the uniform to the more specialized kind of activity. Social development had taken place according to an evolutionary process, by which simple homogeneous societies had evolved to more complex societal systems characterized with humanistic and classical education. Industrialized society require vocational and professional education based on scientific and practical objectives rather than on the very general education goals associated with humanistic and classical education. Curriculum should emphasize the practical, utilitarian, and scientific subjects that help humankind master the environment. Utilitarian education was not inclined to rote learning. Schooling must be related to life and to the activities needed to earn a living. Curriculum must be arranged according to their contribution to human survival and progress. Science and other subjects that sustained human life and prosperity should have curricular priority since it aids in the performance of life activities. And the individual competition leads to social progress. He who is fittest survives. Arnstein, 1984. Specialized education of Spencer versus general education. To survive in a complex society, Spencer favors specialized education over that of general education. We are in need of social engineers who can combine harmoniously the findings of specialized knowledge. This is particularly true in the field of medicine. The expert who concentrates on a limited field is useful, but if he loses sight of the interdependence of things, he becomes a man who knows more and more about less and less. We must be warned of the deadly peril of over-specialism. Of course, we do not prefer the other extreme, the superficial person who knows less and less about more and more. Spencer's survival of the fittest. He who is fittest survives. Individual competition leads to social progress. The competition in class is what advocates a whole child approach and socio-emotional learning atmosphere negate. The whole child approach, a powerful tool for self-focused schools, has as tenets. Each students learn in an environment that is physically and emotionally safe for students and adults, and each student has access to personalized learning and is supported by qualified and caring adults. Frey and 2019. The highlighted words point to no competition, for competition works against an emotionally safe environment.
John Dewey. He was born on October 20, 1859 at the Burlington, Vermont, US, and died on June 1, 1952 at New York, New York. He was an American philosopher and an educator who was a co-founder of the philosophical movement known as Pragmatism, a pioneer of functional psychology, an innovative theorist of democracy, and a leader of the progressive movement in education in the United States. John Dewey, learning through experience. Education is a social process, and so school is intimately related to the society that it serves. Children are socially active human beings who want to explore their environment and gain control over it. Education is a social process by which the immature members of the group, especially the children, are brought to participate in the society. The school is a special environment established by members of society for the purpose of simplifying, purifying, and integrating the social experience of the group. so it can be understood, examined, and used by its children. The sole purpose of education is to contribute to the personal and social growth of individuals. The steps of the scientific and reflective method, which are extremely important in Dewey's educational theories, are as follows. Number 1. The learner has a genuine situation of experience, involvement in an activity in which he or she is interested. Number 2. Within this experience, the learner has a genuine problems that stimulates thinking. Number 3. The learner possesses the information or does research to acquire the information needed to solve the problem. Number 4. The learner develops possible and tentative solutions that may solve the problem. And lastly, the learner tests the solution by applying them to the problem. And this one way one discovers their validity for oneself. Next, the fund of knowledge of the human race past ideas, discoveries, and inventions was to be used as the material for dealing with problems. This accumulated wisdom of cultural heritage has to be tested. If it served human purposes, then it becomes part of the reconstructed experience. The school is social, scientific, and democratic. The school introduces children to society and their heritage. The school as a miniature society is a means of bringing children into social participation. The school is a scientific in the sense that it is a social laboratory in which children and youth could test their ideas and values. In here, the learner acquires the disposition and procedures associated with scientific or reflective thinking and acting. The school is democratic because the learner is free to test all ideas, beliefs, and values. Cultural heritage, customs, and institutions are all subject to critical inquiry, investigation, and reconstruction. School should be used by all, it being a democratic institution. No barrier of custom or prejudice segregate people. People ought to work together to solve common problems. The authoritarian or coercive style of administration and teaching is out of place because they block genuine inquiry and dialogue. Second to the last, education is a social activity and the school is a social agency that helps shape human character and behavior. And lastly, values are relative, but sharing, cooperation, and democracy are significant human values that should be encouraged by school. The fund of knowledge of the human race. Dewey does not disregard the accumulated wisdom of the past. These past ideas, discoveries, and inventions, or cultural heritage, will be used as material for dealing with peoples and so will be tested. If they are of help, they become part of reconstructed experience. If they are not totally accurate, they will still be part of the reconstructed experience. This means that the ideal learner for Dewey is not just one who can learn by doing. For example, conducting an experiment, but one who cannot connect accumulated wisdom of the past to the present. Okay, so school are for the people and by the people. Schools are democratic institutions where everyone, regardless of age, ethnicity, social status, is welcome and is encouraged to participate in the democratic process of decision making. Learners are stakeholders, practice, and experience democracy in school.
George Counts. George Counts was born on December 9, 1889, near Baldwin City, Kansas, U.S., and died on November 10, 1974, in Belleville, Illinois. He was an American educator and activist who, as a leading proponent of social reconstructionism, believed that schools should should bring about social change. Building a new social order. Education is not based on internal truths but is relative to a particular society living at a given time and place. By aligning themselves with groups that want to change society, schools should cope with social change that arises from technology. There is a cultural lag between material progress and social institutions and ethical values. Instruction should incorporate a content of a socially useful nature and a problem-solving methodology. Students are encouraged to work on problems that have social significance. Schools become an instrument for social improvement rather than an agency for preserving the status quo. Teachers should lead society rather than follow it. Teachers are agents of change. Teachers are called on to make important choices in the controversial areas of economics, political, and morality because if they fail to do so, others would make decisions for them. Schools ought to provide an education that affords equal learning opportunities to all students. Ornstein A. 1984.
For George Counts, schools and teachers should be agents of change. Schools are considered the instrument for social improvement rather than as agencies for preserving the status quo. Whatever change we work for should always be change for the better, not just change for the sake of change. Teachers are called to make decisions on controversial issues. Not to make a decision is to actually making a decision. Like doing, problem solving should be the dominant method for instruction. Counts asserts that there is a lag between material progress and social institutions and ethical values. Material progress of humankind is very evident, but moral and ethical development seem to have lagged behind. A friend once wrote, "The Egyptians had their horses, modern man has his jets, but today it is still the same moral problems that plague humankind." Endowed with science and technology, we have become very powerful and yet powerless. We have conquered a number of diseases and even postponed death for many, conquered aging, the planets, the seas, but we have not conquered ourselves.
Theodor Berghard Hurt Brameld, or Theodor Brameld, was a leading educational philosopher of the 20th century. As an American educator and educational philosopher, Brameld was best known as the founder of social reconstructionism, and Brameld advocated that schools should be a driving force of social and political change. Theodor Brameld, the social reconstructionism. As the name implies, social reconstructionism is a philosophy that emphasizes the reformation of society. The social reconstructionists contend that humankind has moved from an agricultural and rural society to an urban and technological society. There is a serious lag in cultural adaptation to the realities of technological society. Humankind has yet to reconstruct its values in order to catch up with the changes in the technological order, and organized education has a major role to play in reducing the gap between the values of the culture and technology. So, the social reconstructionist asserts that schools should critically examine present culture and resolve inconsistencies, controversies, and conflicts to build a new society, not just change society. Do more than reform the social and educational status quo. It should seek to create a new society. Humankind is in a state of profound cultural crisis. If school reflects the dominant social values, then organized education will merely transmit the social ills that are symptoms of the pervasive problems and afflictions that beset humankind. The only legitimate goal of a truly human education is to create a world order in which people are in control of their own destiny. In an era of nuclear weapons, the social reconstructionists see an urgent need for society to reconstruct itself before it destroys itself. So the technological era is an era of interdependence, and so education must be international in scope for global citizenship. For the social reconstructionists, education is designed to awaken students' consciousness about social problems and to engage them actively and participatively in problem solving. Social reconstructionists are firmly committed to equality or equity in both society and education. Barriers of socio-economic, class, and racial discriminations should be eradicated. And lastly, they also emphasize the idea of an interdependent world. The quality of life needs to be considered and enhanced on a global basis. Like John Dewey and George Counts, social reconstructionist Bramel believe in an active problem solving as the method of teaching and learning. Social reconstructionists are convinced that education is not a privilege of the few but a right to be enjoyed by all. Education is a right that all citizens, regardless of race and social status, must enjoy.
Paulo Freire was born on September 19, 1921 and died on May 2, 1997. He was a Brazilian philosopher and educator, influenced by Marxist thought and a pioneer of popular education. His work was intended to empower the oppressed through literacy programs to raise social and political awareness. Freire's ideas were widely used in third world countries as the theoretical base for the reform of their educational system. Dialogue versus the banking model of education. Paulo Freire, a critical theorist like social reconstructionist, believes that system must be changed to overcome oppression and improve human conditions. Education and literacy are the essential for social change. In his view, humans must learn to resist oppression and not to become its victims nor oppress others. To do so requires dialogue and critical consciousness, the development of awareness to overcome domination and oppression. Rather than teaching us banking in which the educator deposits information into students' heads, Freire saw teaching and learning as a process of inquiry in which the child must invent and reinvent the world. Teachers must not see themselves as the sole possessors of knowledge and their students as empty receptacles. He calls this pedagogical approach the banking method of education. A democratic relationship between the teacher and the students is necessary in order for the conscientization process to take place. Freire's critical pedagogy is problem-posing education. A central element of Freire's pedagogy is dialogue. It is love and respect that allow us to engage people in dialogue and to discover ourselves in the process and learn from one another. By its nature, dialogue is not something that can be imposed. Instead, genuine dialogue is characterized by respect of the parties involved toward one another. We develop a tolerant sensibility during the dialogue process, and it is only when we come to tolerate the points of view and ways of being of others that we might be able to learn from them and about ourselves in the process. Dialogue means the presence of equality, mutual recognition, affirmation of people, a sense of solidarity with people, and remaining open to questions. Dialogue is the basis for critical and problem-posing pedagogy as opposed to banking education where there is no discussion, only the imposition of the teacher's idea on the students. Ornstein, 1984.
All of these education philosophers point to the need of interacting with others and of creating a community of inquiry, as Charles Sanders Peirce put it. The community of inquiry is a group of persons involved in inquiry, investigating more or less the same question or problem, and developing through their exchanges a better understanding of the question as well as the probable solutions. A community of inquiry will engage learners in active problem solving.
Okay, so as we know in this discussion, let us now move on to the application phase of this part, which answer the questions just pausing the video where you want to part of the understand how the questions are allowed. You have to remember for our takeaways: John Locke, the empiricist, Spencer, the utilitarianist, John Dewey, experience, George Counts, building a new social order, Theodore Brumeld, the social reconstructionist, and Paulo Freire, critical pedagogy versus the marking method.
In this juncture, you are going to answer the following activities in order for us to check for your understanding. First activity. Number 1. You are going to explain in a sentence why the following education philosopher was associated with these given words. A. John Locke, the empiricist. B. Spencer, the utilitarianist. C. John Dewey, experience. George Counts, building a new social order. E. Theodore Brumeld, the social reconstructionist. F. Paulo Freire, critical pedagogy versus banking method. Number 2. Make a table summary of the philosophy of education. In the first column, you will write the philosophies from John Locke, Spencer, and so on. In the second column is their corresponding philosophy on aim or aims and method or methods of education. In the last column, its classroom or school application. Second activity, you are going to reflect. This is a double entry journal. In the first column, you are going to write 2 things you learned from this chapter, and in the second column, your thoughts or reactions. Third activity, let's clinchers. You are going to choose a correct answer from the given choices for each question. Number 1. Which is not true of social reconstructionist? A. use of problem solving. B. Study of great books. C. School as an agent of change. D. Introduce a new society. Number 2. Which teaching practice goes with the banking system of education which was contrary to Paulo Freire's educational thought? A. Rote memorization. B. Project-based learning. C. Problem-based learning. D. Community of inquiry. Number 3. For which teaching will social reconstructionists be? A. Stress on isolationism. B. Inequality and inequity as normal for an international society. C. Building of an interdependent world that is international in scope. D. Narrow concept of nationalism. Number 4. Why is Spencer's educational thought described as utilitarian? A. He emphasized vocational and professional education based on scientific and practical. B. He stressed on general educational goals associated with humanistic and classical education. C. He stressed a balance of specialized and general education in the curriculum. D. He eliminated the vocational and professional education component of the curriculum. Number 5. For which educational practice was John Dewey? A. Problem solving. B. Banking method. C. Emphasis on the humanities. D. Teaching of the classics.